Welcome to day 11 of our daily Bible reading plan. Today we're going to be reading Genesis chapter 27 and 28, Psalm number 4, and Luke chapter 11. While the story of Abraham went on for quite a while in the book of Genesis, Isaac's is wrapping up quite quickly. We already are at the point where Isaac himself is an old man. He is losing his sight. He can't see very well. Possibly he's completely blind and depends on his other senses. At this point, he asks Esau to go out hunting and to make Isaac's favorite meal. Now, I love this little vignette of this story because it shows us the deep connection that Isaac has with his son Esau, but also I think all of us have had the experience of having a beloved meal that we've enjoyed sharing with a beloved person in our lives. And I think Esau was really happy to be asked to go and be able to hunt and get the favorite food of his father, to make a meal that he knew his father would love. And he was really looking forward to sharing this special time with his father. Of course, the story doesn't end up in a happy place, and it doesn't go the way that Isaac and Esau are thinking the story is going to go here at the beginning. Rebekah, Isaac's wife and the mother of Jacob and Esau, gets involved and decides that she is going to work with Jacob to trick Isaac into giving Jacob Isaac's blessing. Now, Isaac was dubious when Jacob shows up with the meal that Rebekah made. Esau ends up being furious. And the overall story here is that when someone is utilizing deceit, everyone involved ends up having to deal with hardship. Now, you could argue that Rebekah was really coming up with a plan to make God's prophecy from the time of Jacob's birth come into reality, make it happen. But through the story in this chapter, we don't hear about Rebekah explaining to Jacob how there was a prophecy at his birth and how God's plan was to put Jacob ahead of Esau. Rebekah comes up with a plan to make this all happen, which kind of reminds us of how Sarah was trying to come up with plans, and we know that Sarah's plans did not work out very well either. So we're reminded again that perhaps there are times when we need to be patient and let God use God's time to make God's plans come to life. In any case, at the end of all of this, Jacob leaves and goes to Rebekah's brother Laban in another country to find a wife. Now, on one hand, it kind of looks like he's running away because of the anger of his brother Esau. You could also make a case that he's simply following in the family tradition of going someplace that's appropriate for him to find a wife. But in either case, Jacob is gone, and we are left with what's clearly some dysfunctional family values. The relationship between Rebekah and Isaac has been damaged. The relationship between Isaac and Esau and Rebekah has been damaged. The relationship between Esau and Jacob have been damaged. And this is going to impact all of their lives for years and years to come. The other thing when I read this, there are many Christians today who talk about how important biblical family values are and that we should be returning to biblical family values. And this is one of those stories where I have to really wonder, what biblical family values are they talking about? Because when you read this, Esau's got all these different wives and he goes off and gets another wife, seemingly out of spite. None of this seems like healthy family dynamics. And this does not seem like something that should be lifted up. So I think we need to be careful. And, we read, Jesus talks about not judging others and the logs that are in our own eyes when we're complaining about the splinter in someone else. And I think we have to be really careful to look at this story as a whole and see the places where people made bad choices and see the ways that God would like us to live faithfully with each other. That being said, with Jacob on the run or traveling, going on another journey, journeys seem to be very important through the Bible. And Jesus is constantly on journeys with people, and things happen on journeys. People learn things, people experience God in new ways. And Jacob has one of those experiences here. He lays down, he falls asleep with a stone for a pillow, and he dreams about a stairway to heaven. Now, this seems to be his first direct encounter with God, and the translation, sometimes we've heard about a ladder to heaven, but it seems that it's more of a stairway, more of a ramp, which brings to mind more of the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the types of pyramids that the Babylonians built that had a little bit more of a staircase and a ramp going up to the top of them. Through this dream, Jacob is given land and he leaves a stone pillar as a memorial. As we go along here and we come to the end of our Genesis reading for today, the last section is a little bit interesting because Jacob then makes a vow and he starts that if God gives him a good wife, blah, 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 he ends by saying, "This will be my God." Now, I find this interesting because Jacob has just had this experience with God where he's been given this dream and this vision, and God has promised to give him this land. And then Jacob, I don't know if it's a test or still trying to figure things out, but it doesn't sound like Jacob has 100% committed to this God yet. And he's living in a time where there were a variety of other gods that other people around him were worshiping. And it seems that he hasn't made a full, faithful commitment to God yet at this point. So I think it's interesting as we go through this story and we continue in Genesis, we keep this in mind. How do people show their faithfulness to God? What is the type of relationship that we have for God? And what are the impacts of the choices that we make along the way on our own journeys? Looking at Psalm 4, it's in many ways a beautiful psalm to read. I loved how it starts. I was picked by God. Please, God, listen to me. There's a sense of confidence that we are God's, but there's also a sense of faithfulness that when things are not going well, that God is there for us and we can turn to God and God will support us. At the end of the psalm, though, we also see that there is a change of behavior. There is a reaction on the part of the petitioner, the psalmist, who says, "For you, God, I have put my life back together." Now, as we think about some of the bad choices that Jacob was making, I think the psalmist is reminding us that we have choices to make in our lives, and the choices we make reflect on our relationship with God and our relationship with others. And there are times we kind of fall apart and we're not doing the things that God is asking us to do. So I think it is a beautiful psalm for us to remember that we do have the power to pull ourselves together and offer ourselves to God and to be walking in God's path. Which leads us to Luke chapter 11. And here the followers of Jesus are asking Jesus, how do we pray? They keep seeing Jesus to go off and have times of prayer with God. And the followers want to know how to pray. So Jesus offers them what we've come to know as the Lord's Prayer. But Jesus is really offering a structure, a framework. I don't think Jesus meant for us to memorize these words and just go with these words. Jesus is saying this is the structure, these are the types of prayers that you should be covering in your prayer life. The next thing he says, I think, is really interesting because Jesus then also says, go ahead and badger, ask again. If you don't get the answer you want, or if you know that this is something that's important and right and holy, keep asking. A holy God that cares for you will respond to repeated requests. Keep praying. God will give and will give well. As Jesus continues healing people with evil spirits, some of the Jewish religious authorities, though, start questioning, where does Jesus get his power from? And they come up with the idea that perhaps Jesus' power is coming from the devil or Satan instead of from God. Jesus uses a line of logical argument with him. He is living in a Greek era when debate and rhetoric and logic are very important. And he points out that a divided house won't stand against itself. If his power comes from the devil, and he is using the devil's power to cast out evil spirits, how on earth does that work? Evil isn't going to cast out evil. Jesus' power comes from God, who is good and holy and righteous, and is used against evil and badness in the world. Jesus goes on to point out that there's really no neutral ground either, that if you're not for us, you are against us. And he particularly points out that sitting on the sidelines and saying, I'm not getting involved, I'm neutral, is the same as fighting against Jesus. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. continue this thought in the different work that they do theologically in the last century. And I think this is something that we have to really struggle with today. There's a lot of us who are like, we don't want to ruffle feathers. We don't want to get involved. We're just going to sit on the sidelines and keep our mouths shut, and someone else is going to fix this injustice. And Jesus is really challenging us that that is not the way that Jesus intends for us to go. When we see injustice, we are to stand up and we are to stand against it. Which means as we go through Jesus' message, if we are to be constantly reaching out to the battered, the outcast, the people left for dead along the side of the road, like in the Good Samaritan story that we just read, who are the people today that we need to be standing up for? Is it the people who are transgender, who are being kicked out of bathrooms and kicked off of sports teams and having their rights taken away from them to seek medical care? Is it people in the LGBTQ community who want to have the same access to adoption services and marriage rights? Is it migrants and immigrants who are trying to find a place of safety and security to raise their families? These are tough, tough political decisions that we are facing as a nation today. And Jesus, I think, is challenging us that we don't get to sit on the sidelines saying nothing. We need to step forward. We need to advocate for the marginalized people and show love equally to all people. Jesus talks about this, that there will be a greater blessing to those who hear and walk in the ways of Jesus. Jesus is really challenging people. It's not enough to sit and listen. We have to put Jesus' teachings into action. As a congregation, we have developed a discipleship pathway that is inspired by the types of teachings Jesus had with his followers. And we use this to help each of the people in our congregation continue to move forward in their own journey with Jesus. Jesus is still calling us to continue to study, to continue to grow, and to continue to put our faith into action. Jesus brings up the prophet Jonah, the guy who, got spit out by the whale on shore. Jonah was sent to share God's message as a prophet to the people of Nineveh. Jonah did not like the people of Nineveh, and he had good reason. It was the Assyrian Empire, and they had done terrible things to Jonah's people. But the people of Nineveh are lifted up by Jesus because they immediately believed. They listened to Jonah, and they immediately changed their ways and put God's message into action. Jesus says that this is going to show the guilt of those who listen but don't believe and act. The role model of the people of Nineveh is what Jesus is lifting up for us. And Jesus says, you need to act like the people of Nineveh, not like the people of Jerusalem, the people who listen but don't act. He goes on to emphasize this point in verse 39, where he explains to the people we call Pharisees, who are very careful about following all of the different rules of the Jewish tradition. Jesus points out you tithe very carefully. You give exactly 10% of all of your resources to God, but you're not living with the love of God. You are not treating people equally. You are not loving your neighbor as you love yourself. You wash the outside, but you are not washing your inside. So Jesus is directly questioning, saying, how do you treat God's messengers, the prophets that have been sent? And generally, they have been treated with torture and death. So Jesus is really getting very specific and very pointed in his teachings here, and he is really challenging people. I don't want you to just show up and listen to my teaching. I want you to become like me. I want you to heal the people I heal. I want you to love the people I love. Jesus says that sorrow and trouble will be found for those who know God's ways but don't walk in them, or who go so far as to stand in the way of others. So I think this is a really tough question. Are we listening? And then do we try to go through the words of the Bible and figure out, well, this doesn't really apply to me, or this doesn't apply to us today? Do we try to twist and turn to get out of the reality of Jesus' teaching? We love the saying, let's love our neighbors, but are we willing to do all of the hard work to really love our neighbors? Jesus continues to challenge us, and I look forward to continuing the discussion again tomorrow. See you then.